Chemotherapy can feel overwhelming. Everyone tells you to stay strong, you can do it, but no one tells you what actually helps. If you're wondering how you'll get through the next treatment, come and take your seat. Today I'm sharing the practical things that carried me through breast cancer, chemotherapy, and the God who carried me through them all. Are you scared of leaving your children behind after a breast cancer diagnosis? Are you carrying fear, exhaustion, and that mom guilt while still pushing through every day? If you're tired of holding all of that and want simple ways to support your children and feel held in your journey and move through each day with a little more strength, you're in the right place. Hey, I'm Priska. I'm a mom of 2, a woman of faith, and a breast cancer survivor. As a mom, I tried to carry it all alone, but I was never meant to. So I created this space for us. Come sit with me. You don't have to do this alone. So go grab your cup of tea. Yes, that cold cup of tea. I know you've heated it thrice already. And let's get started. Hey friend, before we get started today, I just want to say I'm really proud of you for showing up for yourself today. I know life can feel really heavy sometimes, so the fact that you pressed play, it means more than you know. And if you know someone who's going through a breast cancer diagnosis who might need to hear this episode, please do share it with them. Sometimes a simple message saying, "I thought of you when I had this," can make someone feel a little less alone. And if this podcast has helped you or encouraged you in any way, please leave a written review too. I truly love hearing from you. And your reviews, they help other moms find this podcast. So let's get started. Hey friend, come and take your seat. I don't know where you're listening from today. Perhaps you've just finished your first chemotherapy, or you're sitting in your car after just another oncology appointment and you're wondering, how am I actually going to get through this? If that's you, I'd love you to know something before we even begin. You don't have to know how you'll get through the next months, because you only need enough grace for today, and that's something I cannot say enough. Looking back now, chemo became one of the greatest lessons of my life. Not because I enjoyed it, far from it, but because it taught me something I don't think I could have ever learned any other way. That sometimes God doesn't remove the mountain. He simply walks every step of it with you. So today I'd love to share some practical things that help me navigate chemo. Not as medical advice, no, because your treatment team knows your body far better than I could ever do. And not anyone in this internet could. But simply as one mom sitting across the table from one to another mom and sharing what helped her keep going. So one of the first things I want to tell you is, please do not compare your chemo journey with anybody else's. You'll probably join in Facebook support groups. You'll hear stories from neighbors. Someone will tell you, "I was terribly sick." Someone will say, "I worked the whole way throughout treatment." Someone might even tell you, "My friend didn't have that chemo. Are you sure your doctors know what they're doing? Because it was exactly the same diagnosis." Please do not carry those conversations home. Every breast cancer diagnosis is different. Every body is different. Every chemo regimen is different. So you see, for me, I had triple negative breast cancer. And because triple negative grows really aggressively, my treatment had to be aggressive too. So I started with 2 different chemos. One was a weekly chemo, Taxol, and every week I received carboplatin. And eventually I nicknamed them. Taxol became my little chemo and carboplatin became my big chemo. And not because either one was actually little, but compared with carboplatin, Taxol felt a little bit kinder. And then when I thought I'd be done, there was another treatment waiting, a chemo called AC. And if you've spent time in the breast cancer support groups, you've probably heard what people call it, the red devil, because the side effects are, oh gosh, horrendous. And just hearing that name filled me with fear. Before I'd even ever walked into the treatment room, I'd already imagined the worst. Then one evening, as I was scrolling through one of the support groups, a mom wrote something that I'll never forget. And she said, I don't call it the red devil. Because when I see that red, because it's red and tiny. And she said, when I see that red chemo flowing through the IV line into my body, I choose to see the blood of Jesus covering me. And I stopped scrolling because in one sentence, she completely changed my perspective. And from that day on, I never called it the red devil again. Because every time I watched that deep red medicine flowing into my body, I pictured something completely different. Not fear, not darkness, not defeat. I imagined the blood of Jesus, a reminder that before that medicine ever entered my body, His grace had already gone before me. And it amazes me how one sentence from another mom changed the way I walked into that treatment just before I was about to start receiving AC or the red devil. And she'll probably never know, but God used her. And perhaps that's one of the reasons this podcast exists, so that one woman who has already walked this road can leave little markers of hope for another woman who's only just beginning. So once I had my first chemo, there was something else I wasn't expecting. I thought chemo would make me feel sick immediately. So I waited, it's coming in and you're waiting to feel sick. It didn't. And I remember coming home after my first treatment thinking, is that it? And honestly, it felt as though I'd gone to the hospital and I'd been given an IV of water or fluids. Life almost felt completely normal. What I didn't realize was that the steroids were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. So you see, just before treatment, they give you steroids just to help your body tolerate the chemo. And then they wore off. And that's when I discovered something I came to call the crash. For me, it almost always happened after the big chemo. And it was usually around day 4. And I don't think I've ever experienced anything quite like it. The tiredness, not tired enough to need an early night. This was different. It was as though someone had completely unplugged every battery in my body, it felt like there was a tug of war of my body and my soul. And sometimes I felt like I was sinking into this deep hole where the soul was winning and the body was losing this battle, and I was just like leaving this earth. And, even getting from the bedroom to the kitchen felt enormous. And the fatigue, oh my God, if you've never experienced the fatigue, the chemo fatigue, it's almost impossible to explain. Your body simply says, that's enough. And at first, I tried fighting it. I kept thinking, come on, Priska, just push through. You've always been strong. The washing still needs doing. Dinner still needs cooking. And so I kept trying to push to do, as soon as I had a little bit of energy, I could try do something. But chemo taught me something I desperately needed to learn: how to rest. And that rest isn't weakness. Rest is part of treatment, because that medicine, that chemo, it is incredibly powerful. It's killing you. They're attacking cancer cells and they're also attacking your healthy cells. So, and then as your healthy cells are recovering, your immune system is rebuilding, your body is working way harder than it ever has before. And no wonder you're so exhausted. And so somewhere in the middle of all that, God quietly changed my definition of strength. Before cancer, I thought strength meant pushing through. Chemo taught me that sometimes strength looks like climbing back into bed. Sometimes strength looks like letting someone else cook dinner. It looks like asking someone else to pick up the children. It looks like saying, I can't do that today. And you know what? That's okay, because healing is hard work. I remember one day lying on the couch, one afternoon after another round of treatment. The kids were outside, life was carrying on around me. Everyone was doing their usual and everything looked normal. But inside I felt so weak. And I remember thinking, I don't feel very strong anymore. I'm not used to not being strong. And then I remember this quiet thought settling into my heart. You don't have to be. Like, I literally give myself permission. I said, you don't have to be strong. So give yourself that permission to tell yourself you don't have to be strong. And that stayed with me ever since. Because chemo taught me that courage isn't pretending you're okay. It is showing up when you're afraid, allowing yourself to rest without guilt, and receiving help when you've always been the helper. Courage is trusting God on the days when your own strength has completely disappeared. And Paul, going back to the Bible, Paul writes these beautiful words, and he says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. During breast cancer, I admired that verse. It sounds perfect. But during chemo, I lived it. Because there are many days when God's grace wasn't simply comforting. It became the strength that had to carry me through the next hour. I literally moved from where I could not see the next day, and I kept saying, God, if you carry me through the next minute, the next 5 minutes, the next 1 hour, it literally became that, the next breath. And if you're listening today, you're feeling exhausted and you're wondering why your body simply won't cooperate, I want you to hear this. Your body isn't failing you. Your body is fighting for you. And that is one of the hardest jobs it will ever do. So give it rest. Give it permission. Give yourself permission. Then one of the other things that chemo taught me was that healing often happens through very ordinary things. It will be the kindness, a text message from a friend, a 5-minute walk, a bowl of soup. They don't sound life-changing, but when you're in the middle of chemo, those little things become enormous. And I found myself celebrating the small victories. Like I finished a smoothie today, or I managed to drink some water. I was able to walk to the mailbox. Those little victories mattered because they reminded me that my body was still fighting. And every small step, no matter how small, was still a step forward. Then let's talk about food. Food stopped being enjoyable. And that was the hardest adjustment for me. Food. Food should always be something to enjoy. Sharing meals with families, just sitting around the table. And then chemo arrived. And suddenly food became literally a hard job that I had to do. Almost everything tasted metallic. Food tasted like cardboard. I can't even explain this. Some food had no taste at all. And the strange thing was, the steroids made me incredibly hungry when I was on steroids. So here I am. My stomach desperately wants to eat, yet I could not enjoy anything that I was eating. And I remember saying to my oncologist, I'm trying so hard to eat healthy, but I just can't. I can't stand food. And I'll never forget what she said. She looked at me and she said, Priska, eat whatever you can, even if it's just ice cream, whatever. Or even if it's something you'd not normally choose and it looks so unhealthy. Right now, something is better than nothing as long as you're getting something in that stomach. And that conversation lifted such a burden from my shoulders. I stopped feeling guilty. This wasn't the season to chase perfection. This wasn't the season to really watch my, the calories. This was the season to nourish my body however I could. And maybe you need permission to hear that too. If all you can manage today is some ice cream or yogurt, have the yogurt. If all you can manage is mashed potato, have the mashed potato. If today it's ice cream, then ice cream it is. Because your body is doing such hard work. It needs fuel, not guilt. If I remember, and when I remember back to that season, one of the greatest gifts during chemo was smoothies. My husband would make smoothies almost every morning. And, it's not fancy. It's nothing expensive. It's just whatever nourishing fruits and food we had. It's beetroot, bananas, avocado, spinach. If you eat nuts, you could throw in some nuts, berries, yogurt, whatever was in season, whatever we could afford, we made a smoothie. And looking back, those smoothies became my little lifeline. There were days I couldn't face a proper meal, but I could manage a few sips. And because it was cold and soothing, I could manage a few sips. And sometimes those few sips were all I had for hours. And that was okay because every sip was giving me, my body something nutritious. And then we started doing this. I started taking smoothies to chemo. So I'd sit there in the infusion chair, watching the chemo drip into my veins and slowly sipping away my smoothie. So it was like sort of a competition. So as I take the smoothie, the IV is going in. And it was almost like saying to my body, like, we're in this together. So while the medicine fights the cancer, I'm going to keep looking after you too. So find something that you can encourage or you can trick your mind into to keep going. And you don't need expensive supplements. Actually, I'd encourage you to find out if you're supposed to take supplements, because I was off supplements. You don't need foods that you've never heard of. Most people will go looking for expensive foods. No, use what is available for you where you live. Good nourishing food, simple ingredients, some small amounts throughout the day, because sometimes that's all you need, and God has already provided what you need around you. Well, now the next thing was your stomach will have other plans. Nobody really prepared me for what chemo would do to my stomach. The bloating. One day I would feel incredibly bloated. Or then there was the constipation that became the challenge. And sometimes other people experience the exact opposite. As again, every journey is different. So for me, for constipation, prunes became one of my best friends. I was always having constipation. And I honestly don't think I'd ever appreciated prunes so much before chemo. And papaya helped too. So I would, try to eat little amounts often. And I think that kind of helped. So in terms of bloating, I would eat little amounts of food, which worked much better than just having, bigger meals. Because for some reason, larger meals feel very overwhelming. So be kind to your stomach. It has enough work already to do. And for bloating, something that would help me was to take some lemon water or some bicarb water. I'd just get a little bit of bicarb in my drinking water, and that seemed to help. So maybe that's something that you can try if you're experiencing the same. And again, don't suffer if, constipation. You can talk to your doctor. These remedies they can, but yeah, it can be an incredibly tough time when you're supposed to be eating and everything is just quiet in there. Then mouth sores. The side effect nobody warned me about. Can we talk about that? Oh my God. Because I wasn't expecting them at all. Like, I thought I had done my research, but I wasn't expecting mouth sores. One day eating is uncomfortable. The next day, even swallowing water, you've got sores everywhere down your throat. Like, even swallowing water hurt. Brushing my teeth became painful. Everything felt so sensitive. The gums, like the teeth felt like they were coming off. Even talking sometimes hurt. And that's when I started taking something really seriously, something that I'd spent almost all my life avoiding, bone broth. Growing up, bone broth was something always spoken about with such respect, especially by my parents. If someone was sick, give them bone broth. If a mom had just had a baby, bone broth, and I never really liked it. I never really liked the taste. And then chemo arrived, and somehow bone broth became the pot quietly simmering on the stove. And I don't know what it is. I can't explain what it is, whether it is the warmth, the nourishment, but it became one of those few things I could take because it soothed my mouth and my sores and my throat. And it almost made me feel like it helped those mouth sores heal much quicker. So give a try and have bone broth and see how that works for you. And, on the days that when eating felt impossible, I could take some bone broth and it still gave my body something nourishing. I also switched to the really softest toothbrush I could find because even brushing teeth was so hard. I couldn't even use ordinary toothpaste because that was painful. So I brushed with bicarb soda instead. And several times a day, I just gargled my mouth with bicarb water just to help those mouth sores. And well, it's not glamorous, but it definitely helps. And sometimes if your mouth sores become severe, as they did for me, please don't suffer through them. Talk to your oncologist, and those some mouth medications and rinses that you can use and that can make a huge difference. So you don't have to put with it. Ask your doctor, ask your team, and they'll be able to guide you. Well, let's talk about nausea. So one thing I learned was that nausea can be incredibly unpredictable. Sometimes it felt like this morning sickness that just never ended. Other times I'd just smell a meal and I'd feel, or sometimes I'd just be eating and suddenly I would feel sick again. If that's happening to you, please don't assume you just have to live with it. Keep talking to your oncology team. So the first anti-nausea medication might not be the right one for you. The second one might work. And every cycle can be different. So just keep trying and keep working through. So keep asking until you find what helps. Keep looking until you find what helps. One of the one of the best tips I received also came from a mom in a support group. It's C-bands, where you wear them. If you've never heard of them, they're like little wristbands that you wear on your wrist that apply gentle pressure to what do they call them, like acupressure point, and they're believed to help with nausea. Well, I think they did for me, and I wore mine almost constantly and for a really long time. Did they completely remove the nausea? No, but I think they certainly made it easier to manage. I also became very good friends with ginger, ginger biscuits, ginger sweets, and even fresh ginger if you can tolerate it. Just bite a little bit and it kind of helped. I think it, not because it cured the nausea, but because I think it helped. And during chemo, sometimes little things become the very big things. So try that for nausea. Now, well, can I finish today by talking about something that sounds incredibly simple, but became one of my hardest jobs, drinking water, like water. Water that is the most basic thing. I never imagined that something as ordinary as water could suddenly become so difficult. Every sip made me so nauseous, like, oh God. And I had to be creative. So some days it was cordial, other days it was sparkling water, other days it was flavored water, sometimes tonic water, and sometimes whatever I could tolerate that week. Like, water became a hard job, which isn't something you think about. And then I learned very quickly that staying hydrated wasn't an option. It was part of the treatment. And there were times when, despite trying my very best, I still became really hydrated. And I needed fluids through a drip. And at first, I was disappointed, like I'd somehow failed. Like I had one job, take water, and I'd failed. But then as I kept realizing as part of this journey that receiving help isn't failing, it's wisdom. The goal is not to prove how tough you are. The goal is to get through treatment safely. So if you're struggling to eat, tell your team. If you're struggling to drink, tell your team. If you're struggling with nausea, tell your team. Don't suffer in silence, please. There are so many things they can do to help, and you don't get extra points for trying to be the hero. And so sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just ask for help. And now, as I look back now, years later, there's one thing I wish I could whisper into the ear of every mom about to start chemo. You're going to be surprised, not only by how hard this journey can be, but how faithfully God will meet you in it. When we are first diagnosed, our minds naturally jump ahead. You wonder, how will I get through the next 9 months? How will I manage all these treatments? How will I look after my children? What if I can't cope? And I asked all those questions too. But chemo taught me something that changed the way I approached every treatment. God really gave me the strength for the 9 months. He gave me the strength for just today. And there's a story in the Bible that became incredibly precious to me during treatment. It's the story of Elijah. So Elijah had found himself in a season he had never expected. He was exhausted, he was alone, and he was hiding. The future felt uncertain. And God led him to a brook. Now, here's the part that always amazes me. God didn't remove Elijah from that difficult phase straight away. Instead, he provided for him there. In that brook, every single day, the ravens brought him food, and the brook gave him water. And day after day, God gave Elijah exactly what he needed, not for the next month, not for the next year, just enough for that day. And I found myself thinking about that story often during chemo, because chemo can feel like you're in your own little brook. Life becomes really small. Your world revolves around blood tests, appointments, infusions, medications, rest, sickness. And sometimes you feel so isolated from the life everyone else seems to be living. But looking back, I realized something beautiful, that God kept sending me ravens. And my ravens looked different. They didn't have feathers. They looked like my husband standing in the kitchen and making another smoothie because he knew I couldn't face a meal. They looked like my sister-in-law stepping in and doing all the chores, from laundry to picking kids to taking them for appointments. They looked like a nurse who remembered my name and cheered me. They looked like friends who dropped meals. They looked like a friend who sent me a message exactly at the right time. And sometimes they look like another mom in a Facebook group, sharing one tip that made my next treatment journey just a little easier. And sometimes they looked like a stranger who had donated blood. Because I remember the first time my doctors told me I needed a blood transfusion, I was devastated, to be honest, because I thought I had been working, trying so hard. I've been trying to eat. I've been resting. Why was this happening? And I felt like I'd somehow failed. But my doctors gently explained that chemo can lower your blood counts, and sometimes your body simply needs extra help. So I had the transfusion. And honestly, I felt like a completely different person afterwards. Oof. I remember feeling, oh my God, so this is what energy feels like. I'd just been given Red Bull. And from then on, if I ever needed another transfusion, gladly. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was grateful. I was grateful for every person who had quietly rolled up their sleeves to donate blood. So if you're someone who gives blood, thank you. Thank you so much. You'll probably never meet the people whose lives you have helped save. But I promise you, people like me think about you with so much gratitude. And then one of the biggest lessons chemo taught me was to stop looking too far ahead. I used to look at my calendar and see months and months of treatment, and it felt overwhelming. And then I realized I actually didn't have to survive the many months. I only had to live today. Today, I need to drink enough water. Today, I need to eat something. Today, I need to take my medication. Today, I need to rest. Tomorrow, God will meet me there. Because Jesus reminds us that do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble for its own. And those words became incredibly practical, like very practical for me. Whenever my mind started racing ahead, I'll gently bring myself back. Not today. Today is enough. So maybe you're listening today with your next treatment only a few days away, and perhaps you're already dreading it. And maybe you're wondering if you can really do it again. Can I remind you of something? You've already survived 100% one of your hardest days. You've made it this far. Not because you've always felt brave, not because you've always felt positive, not because you've never cried. You've made it because every time you thought you couldn't take another step, God quietly carried you through another day, and He will do it. So before we finish, I want to say something, especially to the moms who are used to looking after everyone else. Chemo will teach you to receive help, receive the meals, receive prayers, receive encouragement, and receive love. And I know that can feel uncomfortable, I know. But perhaps this season is not about learning how to fight cancer. It's about learning that you were never meant to carry everything on your own. Because one of the greatest gifts that cancer gave me was allowing other people to love me. It showed me that community isn't a weakness, it's one of the greatest gifts. And if I could sit across from the table, if I could sit across the table from you with a cup of tea, I'd leave you with just one thought, and it would be this: chemo is hard. There is no pretending. Some days you'll cry, you'll laugh. Some days you'll feel surprisingly well, and some days you'll barely make it out from your bed. All that is part of the journey. So be patient with yourself, speak kindly to yourself, and celebrate the small victories. A shower today? Yeah. A short walk? Yeah. A half sandwich? A finished smoothie? A good night's sleep? Those little victories are actually big victories. And remember, every infusion, every blood test, every difficult day is one step closer to the finish. And one day you'll sit back to where I am now, looking back, realizing that what once felt impossible became possible, one day at a time. And before we finish, I'd love to pray for you today. Lord, I pray for every mom listening today. You know her diagnosis, you know her fears, you know the treatment she's facing. Would you give her today's grace, not tomorrow's, today? Strength for today's appointment, peace for today's thoughts, and provision for today's needs. Hope for today's heart. Just as you faithfully provided for Elijah each day, I pray that you would send ravens into her life, through doctors, through nurses, through families, through friends, and through strangers, and through the unexpected moments of kindness. Remind her that she never walks into that chemo room alone. You're already there, holding her, strengthening her, walking beside her. In Jesus' name. Amen. Next week, I'd love us to continue this conversation because chemo doesn't only affect your body, it also changes the way you see yourself. We'll talk about hair loss, menopause, fatigue, and the strange in-between days, and how to find yourself again when cancer seems to have changed everything. Until then, take today one sip, one meal, one prayer, one breath at a time. And remember, there's always going to be a seat here waiting for you right next to me. I hope this episode held you in some small way today. And if it did, please share with a friend who needs to hear this or maybe needs a soft place to land. And if you feel ready, please leave a written review for the podcast. I'd truly love to hear from you and to know that this show is supporting you in your journey. This space, it's not just mine, it is ours. So now go take a breath, maybe reheat that tea one more time, and I'll meet you back here for the next episode. Ciao.